here we are in round 3 of the regional championships in Minneapolis. The format is standard. Up top, we have Daniel Weiser, who's already taken down a regional championship before on Is It Prowess, sort of boogeyman of the environment, against the challenger Eric Hawkins on the number 2 deck, Jeskai Oculus, with the perfect opening on Weiser's start, Storm Chaser's Talent.
Yeah, indeed. And the Marauding Mako and Hawkins start, this is a decent 1-drop, but it is really outclassed by a prowess creature. You have to put some investment in here, discard some cards to get it going, especially with Weiser on the play. This looks nice so far.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it feels like this matchup is almost just sort of who's the beatdown, right? Where Weiser is so much more lean, and Hawkins is trying to build a sort of engine as the game progresses.
Right.
All right, so we see a Surfer one with the Otter. I don't think Hawkins is going to take the trade that becomes a chump block. And Slickshot Show Off hits exiled. Weiser plotting to win another RC.
And on turn 2, you oftentimes just play a Steel Cutter, especially because it pumps your Otter. But the plotting Show Off, that sets up for a potentially really strong turn 3 Cutter turn.
Okay, well, here's that Glacial Dragon Hunt we were talking about in the pre-show from Hawkins. This is going to grow the Mako a little bit and probably take down the Otter, as there it is. Steam Core Scholar hits the graveyard.
It's not a bad discard. You would like to put an Oculus in the graveyard, but that Scholar is a really nice one to bring back with a Helping Hand. If you see something like Prosthetic Memory Helping Hand next turn, then Hawkins' position looks really powerful.
Right, and something that I think is sort of a fail state for this Oculus deck is having too many 3-mana cards against a deck trying to go under you. So I think we're going to see a lot of that sort of thing getting discarded in the early parts of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to flood on those 3s. The play next turn might just be another Scholar, but even if that is the case, you want to try to get something lean happening at some point.
Oh, and you can see Weiser going into the tank just thinking, is this the show-off turn?
Yeah, your opponent's tapped out. It means that you're going to get at least 1 hit with the Show Off. The question is that hit for 1? Is it for 3? Is it for 5?
Is it for a gazillion?
Is it for 10?
Okay, here's an island. That's land number 3. Start of a big turn, maybe.
Definitely a card that you would think about a lot in these situations. If you have a Monstrous Rage, do you just want to cash it in, Monstrous roll up your guy?
Oh, all right. Well, Slick Shot hits the table, brings another Show Off with it, and another Storm Chaser's Talent. 2 pair crashes in for 6 of them.
It might sound strange for me to refer to this as a turn that's powerful in a conservative way.
Yeah.
Weiser came across for 6 damage. That's a lot. But this is just a ton of material that is just good later.
It's taxing several axes for Hawkins at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so here's an Arctic Waste, which comes in tapped for Hawkins, takes a point, Helping Hand on the Steam Core Scholar, digging a little bit deeper, enters tapped. Couple cards for his trouble. Going to see something discarded here in a second.
Likely an instant sorcery or creature with flying.
Ooh. It's really interesting. I wonder if you want to discard 2 to grow the Mako because of how compressed this game looks.
Yeah, he does have a lot of cards in hand as well, and you can't take them with you.
Right. If you don't have a removal spell, making a 4/4 Mako, you could even see the Dragon Hunt get flashback.
Ooh, yeah.
Harmonized. Excuse me.
If that's what you're doing with your mana, only answering 1 Show Off and having no flying blocker for the other, I think that's a really scary position for Hawkins.
No, you're totally right. I mean, it's hard to check both of them.
Right. Absolutely it is. And when it comes to these Jeskai Oculus decks, there are 4 main deck Torch Tower. There's 2 red mana available. Mm-hmm. You would kind of really want to have exactly that.
Okay, well, it looks like Helping Hand number 2 is exactly not what Hawkins wanted. That gets discarded to the Scholar, Mako up to 3, Torch the Tower at 1 of the Show-Offs, so that one's going back to exile for good.
Makes a lot of sense to do this at sorcery speed. You do not want to get caught by a Monstrous Rage when you make that play.
Or I think there's a Spell Pierce, the one of the perfect number in Weiser's list. All right, Mako crashes in for a few points. Hawkins knows he's not winning this in the Declare block step.
A lot going on with this untapped Spire Bluff Canal. If you're Weiser, you have to pay a little bit of mind to a potential Torch the Tower on your Show-Off, but also Hawkins cast 1 at sorcery speed already, and that's really when you want to do it.
I think at this point we're seeing Into the Flood Maw being represented from Hawkins. The Paying the Life with Battlefield Forge kind of implies it's not a red card.
Right, that makes a lot of sense, and there are 2, and that one's not going to care about a Monstrous Rage.
Right, exactly. It's something where maybe he's just not playing around the Spell Pierce, can't beat it anyway.
Right.
And is saying, okay, if I'm dead to that card, let's just go ahead and have this be solved and move on.
And Hawkins down to 10. So that's easy Slick Shot show-off damage range. It's not hard Otter token damage range.
Sure.
We could potentially do that with the Otter this turn. It involves some number of Monstrous Rage, of course. But this turn is really potentially scary from Weiser.
Right. We've seen Weiser really commit on the decklist sheet to being the aggressor in these positions. And let's see how he's going to do it. Monstrous Rage on the show-off. Sorcery Speed.
And the question is this a test, or does if Weiser had it rolled up with Spell Pierce, I think that he might have moved a little faster. So this is likely just saying, all right, what do you have for this one?
Okay. So we see the Monstrous roll. Connects to the show-off. This is an attack for 8 with the Otter and the show-off at the moment.
Any additional instant makes this lethal. Scariest opt you've ever seen.
All right, here's that into the Floodmaw.
If there's a Spell Pierce here, I think it would already be on the table.
Yeah, I don't think he would be tanking over the You're Dead Spell Pierce. And he was thinking about Monstrous Rage number 2, making the Otter get a bit bigger.
So a little prowess math. The Monstrous Rage on itself on a prowess creature, that's 4. The previous spell is 5, base 1, so that's 6 for the Otter here.
All right, we see Hawkins fall to 4. But he is untapping a couple of blockers. At this point, and 2 Monstrous Rages being gone, it sounds statistically harder for Weiser to push through now.
Yeah, Hawkins getting through that turn is a really big deal on that side of the table. I also want to draw attention to the fact that there was no 4th land for Weiser. And you might think you're getting flooded at that point, but what it really means is that one kicked Burst Lightning is very unlikely going to be an avenue out of this game for Weiser. It's going to be 2 Burst Lightnings with your opponent at 4 with this much mana.
You also need to hit land drops to convert that Storm Chaser's talent into actually being meaningful extra material.
Right, and every turn that Hawkins is untapping with starting with 5 power here, you just don't have that much time to spend 4 on for future turns.
Right, there are so many ways of, say, Fear of Missing Out and Prophesidic Memory being a ton of burst damage from hand.
Oh, yeah. Hawkins is going to have to give some thought to how can I die on the way back. Like, there are possible permutations where he would only have 1 turn.
Yes.
You probably just kind of can't beat that stuff anyway, so you think about what games that take 2 or 3 turns look like.
Yeah, and at this point, there is sort of that game of, okay, how do I remove as many of my opponent's draw steps as I can? How exactly can I take some damage from my opponent? We know 2 of the 3 mana could be committed to the Slick Shot next turn. How bad's a 1 mana card from there?
Very significant that the Scholar has Vigilance for this equation.
Okay, and look at this. We're going to see that Dragon Hunt get flashed back. And notably, I had not caught how many Pain Lands Hawkins has in play at this point. It's pretty hard to cast spells at the moment.
Oh, yeah. And now we're at the range where 1 Burst Lightning plus Hawkins casting a spell with his lands is lethal. That fast land there, that'll help things a little bit, but there's no access to white mana without Pain, and there's no more game.
Ooh, all right. Otter down, but Hawkins joins it as Slick Shot Show-Off becomes monstrous with the 3rd Monstrous Rage, taking us to game 2.
And the Oculus deck, it is one of the decks that has a reasonable plan against the Prowess deck. I think that play draw is pretty significant here.
Yes.
Weiser with the play and really capitalized on it with those Monstrous Rage.
Right, that was a spot where we also just saw Hawkins struggle to really just stay on the table. I think that showed that cards are not the way to actually attack this as a Prowess deck. Looking at the sideboard, what is Weiser trying to do? I know you've played a lot of this as a Prowess deck.
Yeah, so when it comes to this matchup, I take a pretty light touch. Stuff like Torch the Tower is kind of reasonable. In a situation where your opponent lands Prophesidic Memory and then plays one of these 3-drops that immediately draws cards, you want to kill it immediately. You got to kill that Steamcore Weird before it becomes a 4/4.
Sure.
So you want access to a little bit of that. I don't think you're going up, but you're laterally shifting Torch the Tower as a higher priority than Burst Lightning because of Helping Hand. Then there's some other stuff. The 1 copy of Ghost Vacuum, You don't want to go heavy on that. I like the one copy. You can push back against that helping hand stuff. And the Lithomatic Barrage, that just being a clean answer to an abhorrent Oculus, that's a big deal.
Right, and we talked a lot about Spell Pierce in that last game. Was that a bit? Is this something that Weiser should be looking at here?
I feel like going up on them is tough. You refer to the one copy as perfect. It's really it's really awkward when the card you're trying to Spell Pierce costs 1 mana.
Right.
How often are you actually going to catch the helping hand? There's games, but then there's also spots where you have those Slickshot show-offs and you actually can't cast your spells because too many of them are Spell Pierce. There's a lot going on with that. I like a light hand with countermatch in this matchup. And another card that's a little mopey, it's for the mirror, but Fiery Annihilation is a card that deals 5 damage to a creature.
Several damage. Looking at the other side, you had talked a little bit about High Noon going into the match. That's something that I think we can assume is going to be brought in here, but what else looks good on Hawkins' side?
Yeah, definitely the High Noon. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't play great. I think it's fairly likely that you reach for Sheltered by Ghosts here. It's awkward into removal, but if you get yourself into a position where Weiser's mana is a little bit police, you get the Sheltered by Ghosts on the table, you get an attack in, that game might just be over.
It feels like it lines up with a lot of the sort of engine-y, growing a snowball sort of thing that Hawkins is doing in this matchup, that's maybe just a better thing to pair with a Marauding Mako than just a couple of more counters or something.
Right, and it's a little bit mopey, but the card Exercise, the flexibility, and this is a matchup where it plays. It's not great, but it does answer Corey Steelcutter, and that matters a lot.
And if you like Corey Steelcutter and a bunch of cards like that, you're going to want to head over to StarCityGames.com and pick up your Tarkir Dragonstorm cards.
Yeah, this set has been massively successful. Local game stores here, they've already had to reorder. Get your hands on the set today. Corey Steelcutter is certainly the story of the tournament, so far into the weekend anyway. But you see Voice of Victory there. That's another card that's showing up a lot in Standard and other formats. I haven't seen what people are doing with Mox Jasper yet, but it's going to be something.
Yeah, it's cool. I think Mox Amber really showed us that it's more of a win and not an if.
It says Mox.
Yeah, that's it. That's all there is to it. And Craterhoof Behemoth is one of those cards, has not been in Standard in a really long time, but I walked up to a friend, Luz Saldana. He ended up doing well at the last regional championship. We're talking between rounds. He lost round 1. He walks up to me and goes, I lost to a deck with 4 Craterhoof Behemoths. It was awesome, and high-fived me.
As I recall, he recounted that he lost to a turn 3 Craterhoof Behemoth in Standard.
It was collected within a cage, if you will. All right, so you're going to find this and more at starcitygames.com/MTG-TDM.
Definitely going to want to pour over the deck list from this event. People getting pretty creative with how large Standard is and how many powerful cards. We're going to talk about Corey Steelcutter a lot this weekend, but Collector's Cage, like the amount of rate you get for 2 mana on that card. I'm a pretty big cube enthusiast. That card's been too strong for a lot of my cubes.
That card is not messing around.
No.
There are a lot of times where it's not necessarily about trying to have single sets, blow up a format or anything, but having cool cards to reach to that make you think about new ways to play with your other cards is really the name of the game.
I also like that angle for this weekend. With Collector's Cage being a non-creature spell that obviously cares about creatures, the angle to attack that deck, not really abundantly clear. Do I want to Spell Pierce it? Do I want to Torch the Tower?
Yeah, I think so many players are basically trying to go really lean with a bunch of their removal, and that deck is really good at going over the top whenever it has its perfect draw. And then at other times, it's able to kind of beat up on some of the really efficient removal by just growing its creatures. It has a bunch of 3 mana, make a 3/3, and I'll put a counter on it. Your Torch the Tower is blank now.
Right. And we're watching 2 decks here that are trying to put a lot of power and toughness on the battlefield really quickly. Nothing approaching turn 3 Craterhoof Behemoth.
That is one of those things, you keep saying it and just going, that format has to involve Sol Ring or Gaia's Cradle or something, right?
Right.
All right. Players look like they're pretty happy with their 7s going into game 2. Hawkins on the play, kicking us off with Spirebluff Canal into that Marauding Mako we saw last game.
And the Mako, it got in for some damage. It's definitely a bigger deal on the play.
Yes.
It's interesting. You ask the question, what is more valuable, Marauding Mako or 1 mana prowess creature? Obviously, I'm a big prowess guy. I'm going to say the prowess creature, but it's not just fully me blowing smoke.
All right, well, here's Monastery Swiftspear. We saw the prowess creature win that fight last round. We're going to see it again. Fear of missing out hitting the table, discarding a board Oculus, but no white source in play yet.
Not yet, but doesn't have to show up until turn 3 to just totally swing the game.
Okay. Mako serves for 2.
Possible that the basic mountain is telling on the mana-based situation.
But this is a deck that is, we'll say, decoratively Jeskai. It is mostly an Izzet deck.
Right. And notably, that fear of missing out, that's a look at another card. If we're missing the white source, we're missing the helping hand. We're a little bit closer every time.
All right. Well, here's a basic from Weiser. Island into sleight of hand. Going to grow the Swiftspear.
The texture of this game, both with Weiser on the draw and with Hawkins having the 1-drop, 2-drop, sleight of hand is not how you want to catch up. You would ideally like to be plotting or casting a slick shot or getting a cutter on the table right now. This is really nice, though.
Ghost Vacuum, attack for 3 with the Swiftspear. How perfect is that turn 2, right?
Yeah. If you're going to do something that's not the A plan, the one of Ghost Vacuum, that's kind of ideal.
That card's really nice, actually. It's one where it kind of hedges as being a hate card and a go-long threat.
Right. Yeah, once you get to 6 and just make all the creatures, that's a nice way to cross the finish line.
Okay, well, here's Steam Core Caller on 3 for Hawkins. Pretty nice setup. We're getting pretty close to Delirium at this point.
I think we're probably pretty far off because of the Ghost Vacuum, but I take your meaning. Notably, the Mako is going to go out of control here.
That is true. And notably, cast off Battlefield Forge, which is the white source. We see Hawkins going, well, I don't really need a white source. Maybe Helping Hand is the ban in the face of a Ghost Vacuum.
Yeah, it's going to be tough to convert. Couple possible answers to the Ghost Vacuum. With Hawkins sideboarding, there's a lot of emphasis on the Corey Steel Cutter, but things like those Sheltered by Ghosts, they can also answer the vacuum.
Ooh, and something I want to point out, we see that attack we talked about. It's a lot because Steam Core Scholar, Hawkins chose to discard 2 cards, where he would have been allowed to discard just either one of them.
Love that decision there. Pushes a ton of damage on this turn.
It just speaks to how compressed this matchup can feel and how much Hawkins wants to put himself in the driver's seat.
Absolutely. And from the looks of things, even with this hate card, Ghost Vacuum is really good against the Helping Hand plan, but the Oculus deck both sees so many cards and has so many cards you can just cast.
Yes.
And what has Hawkins done? He has just cast 3 cards, and he has 8 power on the table.
A 1-mana card and then a 2-mana card. And guess what happened on turn 3? All right, well, for Weiser's turn 3, it's another island. I feel like there's a real aesthetic to the draft box basics going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be a player like Weiser, that really strong player that shows up every couple of years. He doesn't keep basic lands.
All right.
It is not worth his time.
Okay, the Swiftspear keeps dealing.
Oh, yeah.
Surf for 1, no block with the Scholar, and passes with 3 lands available.
Yeah, maybe I'm looking a little silly for saying that I like the prowess side of the 1-drop equation way this game has shaken out.
Well, you did talk a little bit about Fiery Annihilation in the sideboards.
Yeah, 3 mana here could definitely just take care of that Mako. It's kind of interesting. There's a little bit of pressure to do it at sorcery speed, just because there's a few ways to make the Mako really large quickly.
All right, 3 lands, tapped by Hawkins.
Ooh, wow.
Tursa, Light Shatter.
And because you have the Mako, it is still theoretically 5 points of haste here. 3/3 itself, pumping the Mako. So you want to move on a removal spell here.
Oh, Fairy Mastermind flashed in from Weiser. That looks so good into this deck.
Yeah. 2 mana, it's weird to say 2 mana is inefficient. But if you look at the battlefield, I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, definitely. This is a card that was really popular when we saw a bunch of 4-straw cards like Rafine running around, especially on 3 mana. That card could be poised for a comeback with all the cards like Steam Core Scholar running around.
Yeah, totally. And if we find ourselves in a Game 3 situation with Weiser with the Mastermind on the play, if you can get it under that first fear of missing out, then it's just massive.
Ooh, and look, Hawkins declines to do anything with the Light Shatter. Not going to let Weiser get a card. Just serves for 9 points. Oh, excuse me, 11. And Weiser is forced to trade because that would have been close to a lethal attack with the Steam Core. You can't afford to go that low.
Right. The Prowess deck can do a lot of damage in one turn. Starting from one Prowess creature with 2 blue sources, I feel like 15 is a little outside of the range of possible.
It's really tough at that point. It is hard to imagine when there aren't any cards like Frantic Search or anything that are
you gotta
kind
cheat.
of free. Yeah, exactly. All right, here's River Pyre Verge. That's another red source.
Start getting into double Monstrous Rage territory, but that's tough on just one creature.
Okay, Steel Cutter Show Off. This is the curve of the format.
Yeah, getting more Prowess bodies on the table. Pretty notably, he has to leave them back as blockers.
All right, Hawkins shows a couple Torch the Towers. These are professionals. They know where we're going, and it's game 3.
I've traded my creatures for removal before. I know when I'm in chump block territory. All right.
Sometimes you just know when your face is the thing that's going to break your fall. You know? it's pretty tough. All right, so going back to the sideboards for just a second, do you think much is going to change in how these players are positioning themselves? I know you really emphasized play draw in the first game.
Yeah, and you got a little confirmation on how the players sideboarded. Weiser there presenting multiple sideboard cards. The Ghost Vacuum I don't think was surprising, and to the extent that the Fairy Mastermind might have caught Hawkins a little bit off balance, it's not like the cards that are good against the rest of Weiser's deck are bad against Fairy Mastermind.
Right.
You still want your Torch the Towers, your removal spells. So there's not a lot that changes here. Like your play draw plan, I think that there's a lot more pressure on Hawkins to have the early powerful helping hand. So you can't realistically board off of it to be like, well, you have the Ghost Vacuum. I guess I'm going to pivot. Your spells just cost too much. You got to at least have that option for yourself.
Well, if you want to stay up to date on how to play all kinds of matchups or even come out to one of these events, you're going to want to sign up for the Star City Games newsletter.
Yeah, get your hands on all the information of all the SCG Con tournaments, regional championships. We're coming up on Hartford. Definitely going to watch the format between now and then. I don't know that the representation of Is It this weekend is sustainable.
Right. This is something where it feels like players have a lot going on between now and then to figure out what the format is really about.
Yeah, and also catch up on those flash sales, Spend your money wisely.
Right, and you can also just keep up on the news on all kinds of different cards. I know SCG stays up to date on that stuff literally every single day.
Happens to be the foundation of the business. So they're a good source to follow for that kind of thing.
All right.
There is something a little bit interesting. I kind of expect that the High Noon is in Hawkins' deck, play or draw. But he is trying to cast multiple spells on a number of his turns.
Sure.
It's more effective now that he's on the draw, the turn 2 play. If for whatever reason it wasn't in the deck game 2, it's definitely in the deck to stop from just getting run over in game 3.
So something that stuck out to me in that last game was that it's not clear to me if Hawkins wants to keep a bunch of his Graveyard Matters stuff in the face of a card like Ghost Vacuum. You don't really want to be using any sort of interaction on that card, so are you able to just cut cards like Helping Hand? Are we just hoping that Weiser doesn't draw it? What's the story there?
I think that your approach to that really is going to vary a lot by how many Ghost Vacuums your opponent has registered. Weiser with the 1. Hawkins knew it was going to happen. If your opponent, say, has 3 copies,
sure,
I think you really have to start considering pivoting. But especially when you're on the draw, you really have to try to break serve in a way. You need to get the tempo going in your direction. And the easiest way, the thing that the deck is optimized for, is Helping Hand, Abhorrent Oculus. That's really Hawkins' A plan in this matchup. I know you're talking about how Prof Eidetic Memory is kind of actually the strongest card in the deck. It is true. It is true. But the Oculus on the table is the prize here.
Sure.
That's the path of least resistance.
That card is really strong in the matchup in particular. I know it sounds silly to... Yes, Abhorrent Oculus is a very strong card in its own right. But in this matchup in particular, when attacking, blocking, and pushing damage with creatures is the name of the game, that card does more than it normally does.
Yeah, and you can start to point to matchups where it's not true.
Yes.
Right? If your opponent is going over the top, say Domain Overlords, any deck with Day of Judgment, Oculus is a lot different against Day of Judgment than it is against one power attacker. It's just not the same equation.
All right, so do you think there's a chance we see the YOLO draw up to 8 cards, discard Abhorrent Oculus to hand size, cross my fingers plan?
I mean, it's not 0, but I both think it is very unlikely and a losing play most of the time.
Sure.
You do really just have to use your mana. And the thing about that play is it relies on you keeping 7. So you have to have a 7-card hand that has a mix of lands and spells that says, all right, I'm going to skip playing a land and my hand is functional. It's a really big ask.
All right, well, it looks like Hawkins is taking a look at a hand with, I think I'm seeing a bunch of ways to pump up creatures, but maybe not many creatures. I think I saw Prof's Eidetic Memory and Sheltered by Ghost and a bunch of lands.
I was going to say, being light on creatures is passable if you're heavy on removal, but it cannot be the aura removal.
The
Sheltered
cards
by
that
Ghost.
ask you to have creatures. Yeah, right.
That one's going to fail the test there.
Weiser with a tough opening 7 from the looks of things.
Weiser definitely has to consider a few things here. You know, when you're playing the Prowess deck, you probably just keep any hand that is, all right, I have a cutter, I can make tokens, I have some pressure to apply. When it starts to get weird, there's pretty varied interaction here. You have your Spell Pierces, your Torch the Towers. If you have a hand that has a little interaction that's pretty light on pressure, and maybe you have something like Stock Up, which is the card that's telling you to keep, you have to ask yourself, do I even have time to cast Stock Up? Does this hand cover enough of the range of possible starts for me to get there?
Yes.
And the strength of the Jeskai Oculus deck, that being able to make the fast Oculus, or just on game 2 what we saw, the 1, 2, 3 curve, there are multiple axes where the Oculus deck can say, no, you do not have time to figure it out.
Right, and I think both of those textures of hands that these players mulligan is they were missing interaction to back up that sort of game plan where you need some sort of way to imagine a route to actually getting to play these cards.
Right. Yeah, I think that when it comes to the prowess side and that does Stock Up make my hand keepable, the hands that is true of in basically every matchup are the hands with Monastery Swiftspear and one of your 2-drops.
Sure.
You can just do that because sometimes your opponent, you don't need to answer any of their cards because they had to pick them all up when they're at 0.
Right. You just go, okay, I have Swiftspear, Steel Cutter, Stock Up, 4 lands. It's hard to feel that bad about that opening, even if your Steel Cutter isn't doing anything till 4.
Right. It's like, well, I can imagine a better hand, but also I won't have to on turn 3 when I cast my Stock Up and my hand becomes better.
Yeah, Stock Up is going to let you look at your Molda 5 and take the 2 best cards.
Both players going to 6. Play draw being so important is interesting. I think that it is pretty close in who this impacts more, especially when you're talking about an aggressive deck with access to cards like Stock Up. The Prowess deck can afford to go down definitely 1 card. And the Steel Cutter also a big part of that equation as well.
I think some of it comes down to how much velocity a 5 or 6 card hand has versus how much of it is cards that I would refer to as not exactly dead ends, but cards that don't go anywhere else or ask you to keep having more things. Monastery Swiftspear, a lot of your prowess cards kind of fall into this camp where those cards are only as strong as your hand sometimes. And if you don't have much going on in your hand, it becomes real apparent that a 1-2 is not that hot on turn 3. And even if you're getting your free attacks in, you're still just putting your opponent to 15 or 16.
Right. Yeah, we saw Hawkins at 15 last game, and it was a tall order to finish from there.
It looks like Weiser is trying to figure out he wants to keep this hand. He's either putting back a land or an Into the Floodmaw.
And that's a really tough choice. Yeah, I spotted that Into the Floodmaw in hand as well. Into the Floodmaw is either backbreaking, turn the game around against your opponent Oculus, or you know, if you have an unsummon effect and you don't cross the finish line, you've kind of mulliganed again.
Yes.
You've gone down a card in that exchange if the game goes long enough to realize that card advantage.
All right, well, Hawkins doing a bit more card disadvantage and realizing that he needs to go to 5.
I will say that there is more pressure on the Oculus deck to mulligan here. You know, that 1, 2, 3 curve in Hawkins' deck, that involves exactly Marauding Mako.
Yes.
There's not a second 1-drop. And then also as you mulligan, the Mako becomes one of your cards that you can more freely put on the bottom. Just make sure you have interaction and or that early Oculus draw.
Right, even looking at Hawkins' deck list, you end up in a spot where it is hard to play a far more reactive game whenever you're mulliganing this much because you run out of cards and you're not actually closing the game. We saw the texture of game 1 was Hawkins playing from behind a bit, having some okay interaction, but at the end of the day, not really being able to do anything with those points of interaction. Got Weiser down to, what was it, 10, 12, something like that before he died and didn't really have much else to do.
Right. This is small, but it's not nothing. If you cast a Fear of Missing Out and you're empty-handed, you just draw a card.
Oh, yeah.
So that's kind of nice.
Call that the Rick Smatty rummage. All right, call this Spire Bluff Canal, Monastery, Swift Spear, Hawkins at 19.
I'm just going to say it. I'd be happy to watch that start all weekend.
Oh, yeah. I shouldn't, but... especially if it's the OG Tarkir Monastery Swift Spear when Tarkir Dragonstorm is the new set. It just feels right.
Ooh, yeah. Also, big fan of Kaladesh Spire Bluff Canal. An aesthetically beautiful card.
All right, Hawkins doesn't have a 1. Back to Weiser, who has an island and an opt.
Draft box ops for Weiser. Also a very appropriate card selection.
All right, well, not so draft box serve for 2. Hawkins 17, a mana being held up for Weiser. Ooh, and a Fastland finishing Hawkins colors. That's pretty nice.
Will not be taking pain from these lands. That's significant. We'll find out what the spells are. And this start here, it might look like Weiser is just kind of limping into the game. But when your opponent's on 5, actually Weiser just has a lot more breathing room.
Yes.
There's less pressure on him to use his mana proactively. You can take a little bit more time in this shape of game.
Okay, well, here's Fear of Missing Out from Hawkins, figuring out what he wants to discard.
You know, it just hit me, the flavor of Fear of Missing Out being the agony of the card you discard.
Yes.
I just never got that.
Oh, look, I understand the name might be a little silly, but the story's there.
I love it.
All right, exercise the discard. That's out of the sideboard. You can see Hawkins saying, I cannot afford to just sit back and play a super reactive game here.
And that was one I kind of called out as being moping and sideboarding. It makes sense to bring it in. I love Hawkins. I drew a sideboard card. It's supposed to be good. A lot of players would be in that mentality. Realizes, all right, on 5, I don't think I can be doing this.
Yes. And that's the strength of this deck, is it does have a ton of velocity that's rooted in different versions of looting and rummaging and discarding and drawing. If you do draw this, it's very easy to turn it into a different card.
Right.
Oh, and here is that start you talked about. We had the Swift Spear on 1, which gets the sort of bluff attack into the Fear of Missing Out, into stock up for Weiser, who's happy to settle in.
Love that attack. You know, the thing you're making Hawkins afraid of is your Monstrous Rage.
Yes.
But it's 2 instants in any other permutation. I like if he just has op to bounce, it's actually really bad for Weiser if Hawkins blocks, right?
Yes.
Like 2/3s bouncing off, that's a bad exchange. I love that attack.
All right. Untap from Hawkins, who is at 16, serves with Fear of Missing Out, decides that maybe some sort, just preserving it for a longer game is better. Torch the Tower, the next play from Hawkins. Sorcery instant and yard for Delirium.
Halfway there.
Limit in a pair or something?
Something.
Yeah. All right, 4th land for Weiser. Drake Catcher out of the sideboard. This is a card that has been showing up a lot in these decks this week.
Yeah, this is a card that largely is there as a 3 toughness prowess creature in the mirror. It's really difficult to deal more than 3 damage with 1 spell for these red decks. So it's going to play here.
Ooh, and into the Floodmaw from Hawkins. That's pretty loud to me.
Yeah, that feels a little desperate. You know, the player Mold of 5 used the Unsummon, and the Drakecatcher is a card that can start to spiral and run away with the game. If Weiser were able to connect and just start making Drakes, that's just going to take it, right?
Okay, and we see Steam Core Scholar on 3, so it looks like a lot of what Hawkins is really prioritizing in this spot is mana usage.
Yes.
That makes me wonder if from this plan, or this point rather, Hawkins is just trying to loot away a bunch of lands to sort of make up the disparity in cards he actually has.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, just not getting flooded. Everything costs fearless.
Yes.
You might hit a point where you want to cast 2 spells, but they can cost less than 3. I think that a big thing for Hawkins, too, is as this game has progressed, he's starting to sniff out what Weiser is holding in hand. Right, so there's Drake Catcher there, no additional creature played. There was that attack that signaled Monstrous Rage on an early turn, and kind of the proactive play on that Into the Floodmaw is also kind of checking, do I think you have Spell Pierce?
Okay, well, we see 2 lands get bent from the Scholar, and then Drake Catcher the only play for Weiser at this point.
A little bit notable now that Weiser is hanging tight with 4 lands. The Prowess deck doesn't have these rummaging and looting effects, and it does have stock-ups. So you can be pretty confident that it's a grip of spells over there.
Yes, and there's a spot where even hitting land drops in the Prowess deck isn't that bad whenever you have cards like Storm Chaser's Talent in your deck that are really mana hungry. Yeah,
we saw part of game 2 being, there's this talent on the play. Never going to have a window to spend 4 on that. So you want to have it ready if it comes up.
Okay, back to Hawkins with another Fear of Missing Out. Discards Tursa Light Shatter. I believe Hawkins is delirious now.
Creature, instant, sorcery, land. Checks out. The easy 4.
The usual suspects, if you will.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, me too. I like to, from time to time.
That delirium, it makes it clear that the Fear of Missing Out is a little bit more valuable. Also, playing Fear of Missing Out over the Tursa, Hawkins is either holding or suggesting to Weiser, I have something to do with this red mana here.
All right, we're in the combat step. Fear of Missing Out and Steam Core Scholar are in the red zone. Fear of Missing Out is targeting itself. There's an untap.
Vigilance the hard way. Good chance it just turns sideways again, though.
Right, it's a spot where if Weiser doesn't cast anything, you're probably pretty happy to just kill the Drake Catcher like this.
Yep.
Or you're getting damage in.
You can be relatively confident that Weiser is not just sitting on more threats right now.
I like how Hawkins has really pivoted in what has to be a low resource game for him and figuring out, okay, how can I actually squeeze every point of damage out of these cards?
You invoked the question, who's the beatdown earlier, and this navigation is saying, I am kind of.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's going, I don't really want to do this, but my cards, Dogwell Hunt.
I have a tenuous hold on currently being the beatdown.
All right, here's Burst Lightning from Weiser, targeting Fear of Missing Out. Hawkins into the tank.
Notably a 4th toughness on the Drake Catcher. Notably means that Fear of Missing Out won't have another chance to attack if this damage just goes through.
All right. So 2 points coming across to Weiser, down to 12.
Definitely big going back to Weiser. I think both players are operating under the assumption Weiser trying to sell Monstrous Rage, and Hawkins to this point has been buying it. So this could be a potentially very big combat coming up.
Right, so we're seeing a bunch of cantripping. It was Sleight of Hand. Now it's Opt. And if we see Weiser able to get these creatures out of the way, we're going to see a bunch of Drakes come out to play.
Having the 3rd power before you attack, that means I am threatening Drake this turn.
Yes.
You got to block or remove your way out of this, and it's kind of loud to opt at sorcery speed, but I love that navigation by Weiser, both to say, all right, it's already 3, I'm going to get this no matter what, and also more looks at something like a Monstrous Rage or a Spell Pierce, which could be huge here.
Ooh. I think we're about to see Fear of Missing Out take one for the team.
You really don't want a Drake to show up when a 2/2 flyer is your...
Right, it's really tough. I do not envy Hawkins' position at this point.
Yeah, like the block doesn't feel good and the no blocks wouldn't feel good either.
Oh, is this no blocks? Okay, Torch the Tower on Steam Core Scholar.
I believe double block is what we're looking at for seeing this play, right?
All right, here's Spell Pierce on the Torch the Tower.
Actually, that wouldn't make sense. Forget that I said that.
Well, it could have made sense if Hawkins had, say, a Torch the Tower.
Right.
Instead, no, it looks like we just see 4 incubation counters going on to the Drake Catcher.
That is scary. Hawkins still with Delirium. Both players at 12.
I love Draycatcher. I did a lot of work on that card. And,
It's very cool.
I love it. I love finding the way to represent horse girls in Magic. You know? All right, here's a serve for 4 with Hawkins. Going to go ahead, trigger Fear of Missing Out, targeting itself. Draycatcher. Going to hatch a Drake.
Yeah, one of the more significant cards in Hawkins' deck list when you're facing down that big Draycatcher would be having access to Into the Floodmaw. Already one burn. There is another copy in the deck. Drawing towards a Shelter by Ghost. That could be a huge swing. I think this turn would be going a little bit differently if he had it.
And this is a tough block on Weiser's side, I think. Yeah, here's just the block on the Steam Core Scholar. Taking the easy route here, deciding to not risk anything against the fear of missing out again.
Yeah, some of the calculus here for Weiser is thinking, it's good for me to block in terms of your clock, but the question is, how quickly do I have to end the game?
Right, life totals are pretty close at this point, and battlefields aren't off parity.
Yeah. The fear of missing out attacks for a lot.
Ooh, okay, so here's Helping Hand, recurring the Steam Core Scholar. That's a pretty big mana swing at a point when Hawkins is really prioritizing not having to commit any of the low number of cards that he has to being land cards.
Yeah, absolutely. And these extra looks, especially, you want to be discarding, if Hawkins is flooding, discarding lands is good. You see it actually play out that way. And that Marauding Mako, the game's not going to be about that card. And cycling 2 is actually a fairly steep cost, so this discard makes sense. But those extra looks really help him try to have an answer to this Draycatcher and or make sure he can actually cross the finish line.
Okay, well, here's Opt from Weiser. While he thinks about this, I also want to call out that once again, Hawkins chose to discard 2. Mako. Oh, no, he did not. Excuse me. He discarded Shivan Reef Mako, and then the Helping Hand resolved. Everything makes more sense now. All right, that Opt resolves. Liked what he saw. Storm Chaser's talent hits the stack, and Otter hits the battlefield. Draycatcher. 3 power, perhaps going to hit Hawkins.
And that sorcery speed up, once again, Weiser saying, I know that this turn I want to hit you for 3 with my Draycatcher.
Right, right.
I'm going to get some information on the way there, too.
Oh, Monstrous Rage. This is big. If this gets through, it feels like this is the moment of this game.
It makes a lot of Drakes. It's also a huge chunk of damage. And I love that play by Weiser. It was quite aggressive, but there's just not that much that could break it up.
Right, exactly. And look at it, what, 8 counters on Draycatcher? Okay.
That's the current record. We'll see where we get this weekend, but 8 is the number to beat now.
All right. We'll have to make sure, talk to our people in between rounds and let them know 8.
Right. Well, we'll keep you updated all weekend on the Draycatcher incubation counter record.
All right, back to Hawkins. Just an untap step, which actually means he did not make use of that mana that he left up last turn.
Doesn't have a lot of cards, so I suppose that's not surprising. Representing something was good, but at some point the Mold of 5 is just going to catch up to you.
And you can feel on Hawkins' side this is really getting into the territory where before you were uncomfortable with the shape of the game. This is coming to the, I feel like I'm 5% to win this game. What does that 5% look like?
Yeah, realistically, you're in the territory where, can I make a game action that can cause my opponent to make a game-losing mistake?
Yes, exactly. Okay, so we see a couple creatures in the red zone. FOMO untaps itself. A couple Drakes. One of them blocking. Weiser thinking about blocking the fear of missing out. Already has one in front of the Steam Core Scholar.
The Oculus deck, of course, not one of the monstrous rage decks in the format. It makes sense that it's not, but I just want to say, can you imagine? Can you imagine right now? A fear of missing out, active with the Monstrous Rage.
Ooh, all right. Well, Weiser can't. Goes for the double block, but towards the tower going... Oh, it's actually going to bargain away the fear of missing out to target Drakecatcher. And I think at this point, Hawkins can guess that Weiser doesn't have another spell because that would have equated to another Drake on Weiser's last combat.
A little awkward with the monstrous roll on a 3 toughness creature, though. We got to do something else, and pick up his cards is what Hawkins has.
Oh, all right. That is going to be the match, going to Daniel Weiser taking one more step towards a second regional championship title.